All right, everybody. This is Dave from the Working Fans Podcast. And today we have professional wrestler Stefan Epic, who's making his return after, he retired in 2018. And as we record this, he will be wrestling again in about 2 days.
Yep.
And so we'll talk about your journey and how you got into this crazy business. First, thanks for being here.
Yeah, of course, man. Thanks for having me on. I always like doing video podcasts. It feels so important.
Yeah, I know. We used to do the phone interviews for a little while too, and once we finally started doing video, it's like, man, we should have did this right off the get go because it's when you're doing the phone interview too, you're like, you step over each other sometimes more too. You're like thinking, is that person done talking?
Yeah, I totally get it, man. I've hosted a podcast, I do radio, I do TV, so I understand.
Now, let's start off with wrestling.
Sure.
So you got in like 2002. What was your fandom first? Who were some of your favorites? What got you into this?
So when I was a kid, I was lucky enough to I'm from Winnipeg. I live in Winnipeg. I grew up in Winnipeg. In the 90s, we had an independent company called IWA. It was run by Tony Condello, who's a really famous wrestling promoter who does the Northern Death tours and things like that. He had local TV, so I was lucky enough to be able to watch guys like Chris Jericho and Lance Storm and Don Callis and Bad News Allen, and they were just like around Winnipeg, just hanging out at like community centers and halls and just working independent shows. So I had a lot of great stuff. Ultimo Dragon was here for a while, so like just hanging out in Winnipeg, and I was lucky enough to grow up during that era. And when I got into wrestling a few years later. Those guys were obviously all doing bigger things, but everybody who worked with them was still hanging out and in the scene. So I got to learn from some really great guys, some really great veterans when I got in. But as far as being a fan, like I mentioned, those names, Jericho Storm, Don Callis, Rick Martel was here too. But like it was always early 90s WWF, like people my age, mid 30s. It was like Ultimate Warrior, Hulk Hogan, Macho Man, Crush, even to a point. Yeah. Crush was my guy for a while.
We all have that guy, I think, that maybe was like near the top of the card, but I think that's why I became a huge Bret Hart fan, because he was like in that middle, but somehow he ended up being world champion. You feel like that happens. You feel like that's your guy, like you're part of that team, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's my guy for sure. Was Crush for a little while.
So now who helped with the training when you broke in?
Okay, so the first time I trained was in 2001, and I trained with a guy named Robbie Royce. He's a local guy. I'm actually, one of the first independent matches I saw in person was him and Steve Corino for the NWA North American Championship. And Corino dropped the belt in Winnipeg only to win the NWA World Belt like a week later in Florida. So he was here to do a bit of business, and he was born in Winnipeg, raised here a bit. So it was like his huge homecoming. But Royce was the guy I first got in there with. I was 13 in 2001, and it was the first time I got in a ring. And then about a year later, I started training again with Hotshot Johnny Devine from Stampede Wrestling. From TNA, former X Division champion, and he ended up being like my primary trainer. He ended up teaching me everything that I needed to know once I got into wrestling. So he's the guy that I really credit, and still hold a relationship to this day because he's such a good guy and was such a good role model for me.
He was part of that Team Canada initially too, wasn't he?
Yeah,
with Captain Moore, and there's a lot of different guys around that. Yeah, a lot of talented people came from. Obviously everybody knows the guys like Bret and Rick Martel and Edge, but there's really just so many talented wrestlers that came through Canada. And like you said too, even kind of being around, it sounds like there was an interesting blend of people that would come there through the independents. Like you'd get those guys like Rick Martel still in the business too.
Yeah. Rick Martel came in in between, he left WWF in 93. So 94, 95, 96, he was working independent. So a lot of that was in Manitoba. And then he made that WCW comeback in 98. And he was actually supposed to take Don Callis with him to WCW. And it just never happened. And then obviously Don Callis went on to do other stuff, ECW and now AEW. But no, they were supposed to go together. And so we had this incredible collection of talent here during the 1990s that, like, if you look at the all-time roster of guys that were here, it's incredible. It's a who's who of like world champions, Hall of Famers, and they were just working small shows around here and in the surrounding towns. So there's a lot of great stuff going on here. And like, you know, as we move forward, there's other guys like, you know, the people that are always named from Winnipeg are Roddy Piper, Chris Jericho, and Kenny Omega, and Callis too. But you know, those are the three big guys. So we have a lot of great talent from here,
specifically from Winnipeg too.
Yeah,
very interesting. So you forgive me, I think you were just saying in the beginning, were you born in Manitoba too?
Yeah, I was born here. Born and raised here. Yeah, started working here. Did, you know, got some work elsewhere in Canada and the US, and eventually went to Japan, but I'm sure we'll get to that. But,
yeah, what's it like growing up in Manitoba? I mean, you know, we know so much Canadian wrestlers from there, but what's the city like? What's everything like over there?
So the city, like, here's the thing: if you're a wrestler, the city sucks because we're a town of about 800,000 people. So like, we're not small, but we're not big, and the closest major city to us is Minneapolis, which is 7.5 hours away. And like the closest other city to us, like bigger city, is Regina, Saskatchewan, which is 6 hours away. So we're cut off from everything. So anybody that gets out of Winnipeg, you gotta be a hell of a talent to get out of Winnipeg. But growing up here, man, like all the stereotypes that you hear is that it's freezing cold, it's minus 40, we're in the tundra. That's true. That's how it is here. The stereotypes are true, but at the same time, there's a very unique sense of community here because we are so cut off from everybody else. You know, we're kind of in the middle of nowhere, and a lot of people understand that. So when somebody makes it out of Winnipeg, regardless if it's wrestling or you know, there's a lot of NHL players from here. There's been Major League Baseball player from here. You know, rock stars. Neil Young came from here. Neil Young grew up here for a bit. So anytime there's anybody attached to Winnipeg, everybody's so happy and so proud for them.
That's awesome. Yeah, it reminds me of when I was younger, I had some friends, still friends today. They grew up from this little town, Voluntown in Connecticut, and they would always make fun of each other, joking about each other from Voluntown, because it was just, you know, it was just kind of like that place. I remember if other people made fun of them for that, they all like kind of joined together, like, no, that's a thing we do. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, it's only us that you can make fun of. Yeah.
Now you ended up we'll break away from a little bit. You do you're a radio host, New Country 104.7. How did you end up doing that?
So I started a podcast. I have a friend who's a filmmaker, and he had a bunch of recording equipment, and he thought I had a bunch of great stories. So he said, man, like, just sit down, do a podcast, see if you like it, try it out. That was 2015. I did it for a few years. I ended up getting an offer from a national television network to host a podcast for them because they were kind of branched off into like online stuff. They have a streaming service and a music platform. So I went on their music platform and did music for 2 seasons, which ended up being like 24, 25 episodes. And then from that, I got a call from a radio station that is province-wide. So like, if you're in Manitoba geographically is an enormous place. Like, you could probably fit like 4 New Englands in Manitoba. It's a very big place. Like, you hear the stories of like Edge and Christian talking about going on the death tours and driving for 24 hours. It's true. Like, it takes you a long time to get across Manitoba. So I got hired by that station. So they have transmitters from the U.S. border all the way up to Churchill, Manitoba, which is at the very top where like the polar bears are and shit. So like, once you get up there, you only got like a few forms of entertainment. So I ended up doing afternoons on that station for probably about 2 years. And then the same company owns just a Winnipeg exclusive station, which is like kind of like more of a mainstream country music station. And I do the morning show on there. Currently, I'm off right now. I've got other projects going on, so I've taken a few months off. But regularly, I'm up at like 4 a.m. doing the show at 6 till 10, and then that's pretty much my whole day.
Now, Okay, so like with the radio, so you're taking time off. So I was going to ask you, is that a vehicle you can use to help promote your wrestling too, or is it just kind of they're kept kind of separate?
No, I keep them separate. Every so often, like I'll mention, I think it's pretty well known that if you listen to a radio station long enough, you kind of develop a relationship or understand where people come from. So I've mentioned that I was a wrestler for a long time, but no, I never bring it up daily. It's not something that I bring up regularly. It's something that I mention every so often.
The producer of the show, Joe, he wanted me to ask you this question about broadcasting advice. And so as I think about that, like one thing that pops in my head is I think it's so easy, and I wanted your thought on it sometimes too, to rely on things you do as like a crutch. Like, for a topic when you're interviewing people, it's like, well, I used to do this or I do this. And it's like, sometimes it's fun, you're connecting with somebody, but sometimes it's like, man, we got reoccurring listeners, and how often do they want to hear me spiel this same story, And so it's like, you ever feel like that? Like, like you don't want to lean into something, or is there?
The very early on when I was doing podcasts, because like my own podcast, I did like 150 episodes and they were all interviews. So it was a big learning curve on understanding that an interview has nothing to do with me. I'm just the person kind of steering the ship. If I have something applicable to add, I would, but it's all about learning. Like if I catch something interesting or important that somebody has said during their answer, I hook on that and I wait for them to finish. And then I follow up with something like that. But as far as the only time that I would bring up like wrestling is if I was interviewing a wrestler and we had something in common, or we had wrestled each other maybe. But as far as like the actual, like continuously bringing up myself, I try and steer away from that. And it's not because it's wrong. It's just that people listen to me every day.
Right.
So that when somebody else new comes on, like I got to give them everything the new person has in a span of like 3 to 5 minutes. So I just got to like put the seat out there and get the hell out of the way. And let them get their stuff, get in what they need to get in.
And this actually kind of thinks of the next question too, because I saw like you in one of your matches. I know Lance Storm was like a referee and stuff like that, and I'm sure there's been other situations where, like for me personally, it's kind of funny. We interviewed like Ross and Marshall Von Erich. Well, I grew up on Texas wrestling, and so I'm kind of like in my head, I'm a fan now because I'm interviewing, even though it's their kids. It's like, oh, this takes me back. I get it. Do you have those moments? Like obviously, there's a Lance Storm in the ring, or other times too, where you're just like, holy shit, what am I doing? I'm here. Like, is it one of those moments in your career where you're like, I can't believe I'm doing this?
Yeah, there's been a few of those. One time, I a few times actually, but the first time I wrestled Bushwhacker Luke, and when like I heard the Bushwhacker music come on and I saw him like doing this on the way to the ring, I got goosebumps, and I'm getting them right now as I'm talking, because like I've done some pretty cool shit, but like when it comes to like bringing me in as a fan, that's the kind of stuff that hooked me. Like Lance Storm was cool, but like I didn't wrestle him. But like when I got in there with Bushwhacker Luke, or I got in there with like the New Age Outlaws or Demolition, that's the stuff that's like, dude, like this is really cool. And there's this weird culture in wrestling where like you're not supposed to mark out for yourself, but like that shit's cool, man. Like once you get to tell your kids you get to wrestle like your favorite wrestlers, like there's nothing better than that.
Yeah, and it's a certain level of success that's not defined by money, I think, right? Like, I mean, you're getting to interact and perform as a peer with these people you grew up watching and who entertained you, and they were like, hero-like, growing up. It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember, hanging out in like kindergarten, grade 1, and like walking around the playground doing this and shit. And then, whatever it was, 20 years later, I'm in there and I'm wrestling. I wrestled him a few times on a Northern Manitoba tour where we were going like way up north. I did a few matches with him, and like just to hang out with him and hear stories about like the sheep herders and the bushwhackers and what it's like to wrestle in New Zealand. It's pretty cool. It's a really cool thing to look back on.
Yeah, I was gonna say, sometimes too, I think fans, especially nowadays, and this isn't to be critical, but I think everybody's just so about the moves and everything that happens in between the ropes. But I'm sure you can speak for firsthand experience. Like, a guy like, Bushwhacker Luke, I mean, the knowledge that he just has on probably just how to like interact with the crowd and doing the right things at the right time. Like it must be a huge learning curve that you know.
Dude, I learned more in 2 matches with Bushwhacker Luke than I learned in like 5 years wrestling just guys like me. Like there was things he was telling me in there that there was a point in the match where I was going up to the top and he hit the ropes and I did the nut deal in the corner. I fell on it. And he was like telling me as he's selling and I'm selling, like telling me, he's like, okay, now get down and do this and come this way. And I was like, oh, yeah. Okay, I get it. It's like, I understand like why I'm supposed to be doing this. And I was really bad for like, this is a little inside baseball, but taking too much time to do certain things. And like people always say, like, slow it down is what you hear in wrestling. Yeah. But sometimes I would slow it down a little too much and kind of like lose the people like very early on in my career, because that's part of the learning curve that you have to go around. But he managed to reel me in a few times to the point where like it clicked. Like you mentioned, there's a wealth of knowledge in the ring with you for 10 minutes. Like take that 10 minutes and learn everything you can.
Yeah. It's incredible. I know. I just listened to a podcast with William Regal, and he was talking about that was the thing like Bryan Danielson did. Like he would just seek him out afterwards and hang out for like hours and hours. Now that's a tremendous opportunity to have something like that for, the whole day and beyond. But like you said, you learn so much in just 5-10 minutes of what.
Yeah. But it's different if somebody's sitting there and like talking to you in the locker room, but when you're in front of a crowd and like you can hear the crowd and the crowd's responding and it's you that they're responding to, like things set in pretty quickly when you understand what's going on.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Now, so you had talked about Japan and stuff before. You've been to Japan then? Yeah. Well, tell us a bit about Japan and then maybe some other places you got to tour.
Oh God. So Japan was a messy story. I don't know if you did any reading into that, but
not. So
okay. I got booked for Big Japan Pro Wrestling right before they did their CZW relationship part 2. Like they had CZW, WXW, and Big Japan all together doing tours together. So like Walter was there, Tommy End, who's Malachi Black, Black G's from CCW. They were all there like weeks after me, but I was the last person to go before that. And I had some personal problems, as you hear of in wrestling, and I ended up having a little bit of an issue on the plane over, where I took too many things and I got real sick and I ended up in a hospital. So my tour was cut very short. I had one match and I came home because, I'd had a drug overdose is what had happened. So my one tour of Japan, my one big shot, I walked away half willingly, half unwillingly. And it didn't put a bad taste in my mouth because it was my own choices and I was dealing with a lot in my personal life. But my one big shot in Japan, I kind of fumbled. And, it's all on me. Nobody else did it. But I got to go there and live my dream, because that was always the number one, was to go to Japan and try and make myself a living over there, like a Steve Corino was doing a few years earlier, or, like Hansen. And actually a guy I'm friends with now, like now he's out of the business for a number of years, is Rick Patterson, who is, the Leatherface from IWA Japan. He lives like 10 minutes from me. So, we talk not even about wrestling, just about like the weather, what's going on in the city, news, things like that. But I wanted to do something like he was doing, where just making a living internationally. And I had the shot, but I fumbled it and, nothing ever came up of it, which, is sad. But at the same time, it is what it is. It led me to broadcasting, and now I have, radio show and a TV show and all this other kind of stuff.
You said something that I'm curious, just because, like you said earlier, somebody says something interesting and grab onto it. For me personally, I see you take accountability for your own actions and stuff like that. How important is that for people in recovery to go, okay, this is on me and I need to get better?
So in like 2011 is when I went, right before, like I mentioned, that whole CTW thing started up again. And I got sober in 2013, so it's been like 9 years now. But it took a few years to really understand like what was going on. That yes, it was like I knew off the hop it was my fault, but I didn't understand why. Because there was like there were some things that happened growing up that were traumatic, and I didn't deal with them. And once I got to be an adult and get into real life, and I had all this trauma that was unresolved, I didn't know how to do life. So as I'm in a few years away from it now, I understand that yes, it was my fault, but also like there was a lot of things that happened alongside of it that I wasn't in control of. Yeah. So the accountability thing is 100% on me, but also I understand that, it's my fault, but what happened to me was not my fault.
I understand what you're saying completely. Yeah. I'll just say like personally, like I was in a marriage for years, and I was not like a physically abusive, but I was a yeller. Like when I would argue, I would yell and I'd yell, and it took me. I didn't know that like that was strange. And once I started looking into it and realizing, I grew up in that environment. Not to say anything bad about them; they were great people, but they grew up in worse environments. And it's just like breaking that cycle where you yell. And I'm like, why did I do that? Like, this is what I grew up with. This is what I picked up on. And you don't know that shit. Even though at the end of the day, like that's my fault. I had to discover why that's happening. And I'm sure much like you did, you have to like, why did this happen? Why am
right? Yeah, it's exactly the same thing. It's coming from the environment that I came from. There was a lot of things that I didn't get when I was a child or a teenager or, a young adult that really fucked me in the end. Sorry for swearing, but
that's right. You can swear on the show, but go ahead.
Yeah, like when I got to Japan and I'd had that experience, it was like I literally worked from the time I first saw Japanese wrestling, which was on IWA Wrestling in Winnipeg. Chris Jericho would bring back his tapes, and like they would air one Japanese match every Saturday. And I would watch him and Jado and him and Gato and him versus Rey Mysterio from like WAR. And I worked from that time in like whatever it was, 1995, up until 2011 to get my shot. I got my shot, and then I fumbled it. So like to look back on it now and understand that yes, it's my fault, but there was a whole bigger picture of things
right
that I wasn't aware of really until I got a little bit older. And mind you, I was 23 years old when I went to Japan. I was a very young, and I remember being in the locker room, and Men's Teo, who was my tag partner for my one match over there, looked at me. He's like, I have a son who's 23. He's like, you're too young to be here. Because he spoke a little bit of English. He's like, you're too young. He's like, you should be at home. You should be at home, like learning and doing something. But it is what it is, man.
Yeah. There's I heard a martial arts coach say this you try not to look at it like winning and losing, win or learn. Yeah. So
yeah, exactly. That's the way I look at it now.
It's good. And did you travel anywhere else? Any like European, Mexico, anything like that? Or
no. I trained. I did the like a few days like tryout with New Japan USA in like 2006. The first time they tried to get into the US when they had the Inoki Dojo in Los Angeles. I went down there with like an incredible group of guys. Like Shinsuke Nakamura was there, Minoru Tanaka, Carl Anderson was there. Like guys from Ring of Honor at the time, like Fast Eddie, if you remember Fast Eddie from early ROH, he was there as well. Hannibal, the Hannibal TV guy. Yeah. So there was a good group of guys that were down there for a few days training. It was kind of like an open gym. They invited like whoever to come down, and I ended up driving down because I had some family there. I ended up staying with my family and training there for a few days. So that was a really cool experience. I got to work around with like Rocky Romero and Durango Kid who were training there. But as far as like doing any international stuff, I would just do like northern US indies, a lot of Canada stuff, like out to British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario. But like most of it was in Manitoba because like I mentioned, I was 23 when I went to Japan, but I was also 23 when I had my first child. So so there was a lot of conflicted feelings, like do I continue pursuing or do I stay at home and be a dad kind of thing.
No, I mean that's the real life of it, right? I was gonna ask, so now you had, again, there's an interesting group of wrestlers you're working with in the time period. Did you have wrestlers? You hear like what a different environment is, like the locker rooms and stuff nowadays, in the sense that, people do generally, for the most part, seems like work together. Whereas a lot of the old timers, some days, obviously you had good interactions, but would like sometimes make you, like pay your dues or earn it, or sometimes even take liberties. Did you A, have people ever try to take liberties with you, and B, did you have to kind of learn how to handle yourself to a certain degree too?
Yeah, I had my first match when I was 15, so I was very young. I was in grade 10. So what is that in American? That's like your sophomore. Yeah. But yeah, there was a few guys, but like the sad thing is, it was like guys who had never accomplished anything or were never going to accomplish anything that tried to take liberties. But I did get to work with a lot of great guys who had been around the world, like Kerry Brown, for one of them, who was a Stampede Wrestling guy, and feuded with like Brett and Davey and Dynamite and all those guys in the 80s. He was still around doing shows when I broke in, and I actually tell this story because it's kind of funny. He threw the lightest punch that I had ever felt, but he also threw the stiffest kick that I ever felt at the same time too. We were working on a spot outside the ring in the crowd, and he told me beforehand, he's like, hey, when we're out in the crowd and the people, like, I'm going to work a little tighter because, there's no daylight out there. In the ring, you can kind of hide it. But he wound up and he kicked me so hard, he left like bootlaces across my chest. I like looked down because I was like wearing a shirt during this spot because we were on the outside, and I pulled my shirt off and I had bootlaces up here. But also at the same time, like we did something else like a few months earlier, and he threw this like incredible working punch. And I wasn't even sure if I should sell it or register it because I wasn't sure if it hit me. But like guys like that, I got to work with Kerry Brown, who is a legend. I got to work with Eddie Watts, who is a guy who worked Puerto Rico, a guy who worked Japan with Rick Patterson in IWA Japan and Wing, and did a lot of stuff in Puerto Rico. I remember working like a northern Manitoba town with him like 2 weeks after he had worked Triple Mania in Mexico. And he was just telling me about like working with La Parca at Triple Mania. And I'm like, dude, we're like 4 hours north of Winnipeg now. Like, why are you here? Why aren't you making money down there? But I got to work with a lot of great guys, a lot of good veterans. And then like nowadays, as weird as it is, like, because it's been 20 years since my first match, I'm 34. You know what I mean? It's like, I guess I'm the veteran, but at the same time, I'm the same age as a lot of guys who are, 5, 6, 7 years in. So it's interesting. It's an interesting dynamic.
Why did you ultimately walk away for the first time? Was it because you were a dad? Was it other stuff too? Are there opportunities coming up? Is it just a combination of things?
Yeah, it was just not having fun anymore. You always read wrestling biographies and hear shoot interviews that when somebody told me that Terry Funk said, when you lose the feeling when you're standing behind the curtain and your music is on and you feel like you have to piss because you got the nervous piss and you lose that piss feeling, it's time to walk away. And I had lost that nervous piss feeling that I had heard about. So when that went away, I was just like, there's nothing left. I wrestled my heroes and went to Japan. I never made any money, but I had fun. I got to do what I wanted to do.
And you're back now. Did you feel like ultimately too, maybe you needed just to do something different, recharge the batteries, and maybe,
it was kind of like a coincidence thing. I had a friend of mine who is starting a new company here in Winnipeg, and we just got to talk, and I was like, dude, if you ever need me or whatever, I would happy to help out. And then that turned into further conversation, and now like, I'm fully on the card and possibly in a very important matchup on the card against the guy that I got in the ring with for the very first time, like 21 years ago, Robbie Royce, who beat Steve Corino for the NWA North American title. Now we're going to be wrestling in 6 weeks from now or whatever it is from today. So, coming back, I have my first match this Thursday and I'm nervous. I'm still very overweight compared to what I used to be, but I left the business and I put on some weight, but I've dropped like 30 pounds. I'm hopeful that I won't I won't blow up and die in the middle of the ring on Thursday, but I'm looking forward to it. It should be fun.
Yeah. Now, that's what I was kind of thinking too. You know, I mean, I know just as, you know, being 45, being an adult, and not even doing wrestling, but just doing day-to-day things, like going, okay, I need to stretch a little more if I'm going to do this, or I got to do that. I'd imagine your routine in your head getting back into this is you're like, okay, I need to do this, right? Like you probably have a different mindset, I'd imagine.
I have a lot of ointment ready. Just say that I have a lot of ointment ready. I popped my shoulder out wrestling in like 2014, which is one of the last little swings I did through, doing a tour. I broke my back. I totally skipped over that. I don't know why I didn't bring that up. I took a backdrop actually we were talking before we started recording at like this big ballroom venue that I was working at in like Williston, North Dakota. And I just took a backdrop and I felt something pop in my back and I couldn't move my legs for a minute. And I thought something was wrong. And then that was pretty much it.
I was going to ask you about injuries too. So that's okay.
Yeah. Well, that was one of them.
Yeah.
But I ended up healing pretty well. And I'm a little worried about that, but it wasn't like a severe break. It was like a little tiny fracture that, doctors kept an eye on. So, coming back, I have a lot of ointment ready. I'm a little bit worried. I'm going to be doing a lot of stretching. I do yoga every day, so I'm hoping that helps. And like regular yoga, not DDP yoga. So I'm hoping that helps a little bit. And I'm just hoping that I don't embarrass myself on Thursday.
Yeah, I mean, I know like we interview some comedians and stuff sometimes, and it always talks about going out like and kind of getting their chops ready. You know, like you hear like comedians say that right before they go like and do a big special. They'll go out to like their clubs. Like you got to get your legs underneath you. I'd imagine.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And like the crazy part is that I haven't disclosed this to anybody yet, but I haven't been in a ring to train yet.
Okay.
So the first time I get into a ring to take a bump is going to be during the match. So it's going to be a little bit maybe worrisome once I get in there and I take the first bump. But we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, hey, sometimes you just go on the fly and then you see how it's going to be.
I'm hoping so. There's some great guys on the card, like really popular independent names. So I'm hoping that like I don't stink the joint out. So we'll see.
Any of these shows you got coming up, are they going to be available anywhere like on IWTV, anything?
I think this one on Thursday will be IWTV, but I don't think it's live. I think it'll be up like following the event. So it's called Time Bomb Pro. It's in Fargo, North Dakota, which is in the upper Midwest, obviously. So not a whole lot of wrestling going on out there, but the stuff they do have is good and it's real good. So I'm hoping that I can add to that on Thursday. But the later shows, I believe, will be up somewhere sometime. 3D Pro Wrestling in Winnipeg here, which is having their debut event on May 26th. It'll be up somewhere. I don't know where yet. I don't know how. I can't really announce it yet, but it will be somewhere.
That's all right. Well, and for anyone listening to this interview, this will be out in audio too. We'll put some links out and stuff too. And
absolutely.
So, is there anything else you got coming up? Did you want to promote wrestling or anything? You can.
I got this TV thing going. I'm hosting a television program for a national TV network up here in Canada called the Aboriginal People's Television Network. I'm half Native American, is what you would call it in the States. So I host a TV show about Indigenous language. It'll be airing later on this year. I got a 9-episode first season, and hopefully, if that goes well, we'll be back for round 2.
I know this interests me. I'm sorry, as I was curious. You said we would call it in the States like half Native American. What would you say? I'm just curious.
First Nations. That's what we call it in Canada. Because like the tribes that were here were the first countries per se, and each had their own like territory of living. So the First Nations just means the first countries, the first people, the first inhabitants.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I me personally, I find this stuff interesting. The older I get to like learn, I don't know about you, but as I get, I find myself far more. I was always a pretty like accepting person, but I'm more like I want to know more about other stuff now. Like I'm right. Yeah.
I find that stuff too. I find that stuff too as I get older. I'm wanting to learn more about other people and and where they live, how they live. Like, I got a lot of friends out on the East Coast in New England that I talk to on a daily basis. So I'm always learning about like Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and like what's going on and what's the rich parts and what's the poor parts. And there's so many schools out there. It seems like New England has a university every 10 minutes.
Oh yeah.
So I'm always learning, man. I'm always trying to learn.
Absolutely, that's life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hey, Stefan, I wish you luck. In these next few weeks. Definitely Thursday. Like I said, we're recording this on a Tuesday. If anyone did this, and definitely Thursday. I'm wishing you big luck. That's your first time, obviously, back in a while. But I hope the whole thing goes well, man. You're a great guy, and maybe after I don't know how many matches you got set up right now, but maybe when you get a little break in, we can kind of talk and just see how everything's going, man.
Absolutely. It's my first match in 4 years, but before that, there was a 3-year break. So technically, this is like my first in 7 years. So I'm very nervous, but we're going to have a good time. And hopefully I'll be in good enough shape to come back on the show.
Absolutely. Hey, and that's you want that nervous energy at least, too. So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So. All right, Stefan, thank you so much for doing this episode. And is there one other thing you want to do? I'm so sorry. Social media, anything you want to tell people where they can find you, let them know.
Instagram is a good place. That's usually where I'm hanging out. Stefan, Stefan X, Richard, Richard. You can hit me up. I post a lot of stuff about radio, TV, my personal stuff, and then especially wrestling as well now that things are picking back up. So follow me over there. I got a Pro Wrestling Tee store attached on the link in the bio. So hit me up.
All right. Thank you, man. And thank you, fans, for tuning in. Appreciate you.